Buenos Aires, 1992. A silver-haired man in his 60s steps off a bus in the quiet suburb of Olivos, carrying groceries in a canvas bag. His neighbors know him as Ricardo Clement, a German immigrant who arrived in Argentina after the war, worked odd jobs for decades, and now lives modestly on a small pension. He speaks Spanish with a thick German accent, keeps to himself, attends no social gatherings. On weekends, he tends a small garden behind his modest house. He reads German newspapers at a corner cafe. He's the kind of invisible older immigrant that every South American city has thousands of men who fled Europe's ruins decades ago and built quiet, unremarkable lives in the New World. But Ricardo Clement isn't who he claims to be. His real name is Adolf Eichmann, and he was one of the primary architects of the Holocaust, responsible for organizing the deportation of millions of Jews to death camps. And the man watching him from across the street, pretending to read a newspaper, is a Mossad operative who has been tracking him for 3 years. The surveillance photographs, the pattern analysis, the confirmation of identity through a dozen different indicators, all of it has led to this moment. Eichmann believes he successfully escaped justice and disappeared into anonymity. He has no idea that Israeli intelligence has been watching his every move for years, documenting his life, waiting for the perfect moment to snatch him from his safe haven and bring him to trial in Jerusalem. This is the story of how Mossad found the world's most wanted Nazi hiding in plain sight and prepared the most audacious kidnapping in intelligence history. The story begins not in 1992 but in 1945, in the chaotic final days of World War II. Adolf Eichmann was an SS Obersturmbannführer, a lieutenant colonel who headed the Gestapo's Jewish Affairs Office. His official title was Bland Head of Department 4B4 of the Reich Security Main Office, but his actual responsibility was monstrous. He was the chief logistical coordinator of the Final Solution, the Nazi plan to systematically murder every Jew in Europe. Eichmann didn't operate gas chambers or pull triggers. His weapon was bureaucracy. He organized train schedules that transported Jews from across occupied Europe to death camps. He coordinated with local authorities to identify and round up Jewish populations. He calculated the logistics of mass murder with the efficiency of someone managing a shipping company. By 1944, as Allied forces closed in on Germany, Eichmann knew that defeat was inevitable and that Nazi leadership would face justice. He had attended the Wannsee Conference in 1942, where the Final Solution was formally planned. He had coordinated deportations from Hungary, Slovakia, Greece, France, Holland, everywhere Nazi power reached. His role was documented in thousands of official records. There would be no claiming ignorance, no arguing he was just following orders. If captured, he would face execution. His only hope was escape. As Germany collapsed in spring 1945, Eichmann went into hiding. Unlike some Nazi leaders who committed suicide or were immediately captured, Eichmann had planned his escape carefully. He obtained false papers identifying him as Adolf Karl Barth, a low-ranking Luftwaffe corporal. He avoided major cities where Allied intelligence was hunting war criminals. He hid in rural Bavaria for months, working as a lumberjack, keeping his head down. In early 1946, he was briefly detained by American occupation forces but not identified. His false papers were convincing enough, and American authorities were overwhelmed with millions of displaced persons and captured soldiers. Eichmann was released, an extraordinary stroke of luck that he later acknowledged saved his life. For the next 4 years, Eichmann lived under false identity in Germany, moving between rural villages, working menial jobs, always watching for signs of pursuit. But by 1950, he knew staying in Europe was too dangerous. Nazi hunters were becoming more sophisticated. The Nuremberg trials had publicized his name and crimes. Survivors were providing testimony identifying him. He needed to leave Europe entirely, to disappear into a country where European authorities had no jurisdiction and little interest in pursuing old war crimes. South America became the destination of choice for fleeing Nazis. Argentina, under President Juan Perón, had an unofficial policy of welcoming European immigrants without asking too many questions about their pasts. Perón's government was nationalist, authoritarian, and sympathetic to fascism. It saw European immigrants, even former Nazis, as useful for building. Argentina's economy and counterbalancing the country's large Jewish population. A network of sympathizers, including Catholic clergy who believed in Christian forgiveness and anti-communist activists, who valued former Nazis for their hatred of the Soviet Union, helped establish Radelin's escape routes from Europe to South America. In 1950, Eichmann made contact with this network through intermediaries in Germany. He obtained a Red Cross travel document issued under the name Ricardo Clement, a common method of creating false identities, exploiting the Red Cross's humanitarian mission to assist refugees. The document listed him as a German refugee fleeing post-war hardship, which was technically true even if it concealed the real reason for his flight. With this document, Eichmann traveled from Germany to Italy, then boarded a ship to Argentina, arriving in Buenos Aires in July 1950. Argentina in 1950 was a country of immigrants. Hundreds of thousands of Europeans had fled there after the war. Legitimate refugees, economic migrants, and war criminals all mixed together in Buenos Aires's working-class neighborhoods. Eichmann settled into this community, taking a job at a Mercedes-Benz factory outside Buenos Aires. He lived in boarding houses, avoided political discussions, made no close friends. His goal was absolute invisibility. As long as no one looked closely at Ricardo Clement, Adolf Eichmann could live out his life in peace. For nearly a decade, this strategy worked. Eichmann lived quietly, eventually bringing his wife and children from Europe to join him in Argentina. They settled in a modest house in the suburb of Olivos. Eichmann worked various jobs: factory worker, water company technician, always under his false name. His children attended local schools, his wife shopped at local markets, the family attended German immigrant social events. To casual observers, they were just another German family that had fled Europe's devastation for South America's opportunities. But Eichmann made a critical mistake. He maintained contact with other former Nazis living in Argentina. The German immigrant community in Buenos Aires included numerous former SS officers, Wehrmacht soldiers, and Nazi Party members. They recognized each other through subtle signals, certain phrases, shared memories of the war, political views that marked them as unrepentant. Eichmann couldn't completely isolate himself. Human beings need social connection, need community. So he carefully cultivated relationships with other former Nazis, men he could talk to honestly without fear of exposure. This network became his vulnerability. By the mid-1950s, Nazi hunters Simon Wiesenthal in Vienna, Tavia Friedman in Israel, various survivors working independently had developed information that Adolf Eichmann might be alive in Argentina. The evidence was fragmentary rumors from former Nazis who had been captured, testimony from witnesses who claimed to have seen someone matching Eichmann's description, intercepted letters between former Nazis that mentioned the old comrade living in Buenos Aires. But nothing definitive, no confirmed location, no proof of identity. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In 1956, a half-blind Jewish man named Lothar Hermann was living in Buenos Aires when his daughter Sylvia came home talking about a boy she had met at work named Klaus Eichmann. Klaus had made anti-Semitic comments, saying his father had been important in Germany during the war and that the Holocaust was exaggerated propaganda. Lothar Hermann was a survivor. He had been imprisoned in Dachau concentration camp before fleeing to Argentina. The name Eichmann triggered immediate recognition. He began investigating discreetly, learning that Klaus's father lived in Olivos under the name Ricardo Clement. Hermann reported this information to Fritz Bauer, a German prosecutor who had been pursuing Nazi war criminals. Bauer was skeptical. There had been many false reports of Eichmann sightings over the years, but Hermann's information was detailed enough to warrant investigation. Bauer couldn't trust German intelligence or police. Too many former Nazis still held positions in post-war German government, so he made an extraordinary decision. In 1957, he contacted Mossad, Israel's intelligence service, and provided them with Hermann's information. If Adolf Eichmann was alive in Argentina, Israel was the only entity with both the capability and the motivation to bring him to justice. Mossad received Bauer's information with cautious interest. Capturing Adolf Eichmann would be symbolically and politically enormous. He was the most significant Holocaust architect still alive. His trial would provide a platform to document Nazi crimes, educate younger generations, and demonstrate that Jewish people would never again be passive victims. But the operational challenges were immense. Argentina was 10,000 miles from Israel. Eichmann, if he was actually there, was living under sovereign protection of a foreign government that had no extradition treaty with Israel and no interest in surrendering him. Any operation to capture him would be illegal under international law, a violation of Argentine sovereignty that could trigger serious diplomatic consequences. Mossad's director, Isser Harel, made the decision to investigate carefully before committing to an operation. In 1957, he dispatched an operative to Buenos Aires to verify Herman's information. The operative operating undercover as a European businessman spent weeks conducting surveillance on the house in Olivos where Ricardo Clement supposedly lived. He photographed a man matching Eichmann's general description: right age, right build, German accent. But physical appearance alone wasn't enough. Eichmann had been photographed extensively during the war, but 15 years had passed. People age, change, become unrecognizable. Mossad needed definitive proof before authorizing a kidnapping operation. The investigation continued through 1958 and 1959. Multiple operatives rotated through Buenos Aires, conducting surveillance, photographing Clement at different angles and lighting conditions, documenting his routines and movements. They analyzed his gait. The way people walk is surprisingly distinctive and hard to disguise. They studied his mannerisms, his habits, everything that might confirm identity. They investigated his family, learning that his wife was Vera Eichmann, Adolf Eichmann's wife, and that his children's ages matched Eichmann's children. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, but Harel demanded more. The definitive confirmation came through a photograph taken in March 1960. A Mossad operative, posing as a tourist, managed to photograph Clement at close range. The photograph was sent to Tel Aviv, where forensic specialists compared it with wartime photographs of Eichmann. They analyzed facial structure. Bone structure doesn't change with age. They measured distances between eyes, the shape of ears, the structure of the nose and jaw. They examined his hands. The distinctive shape of Eichmann's fingers, visible in a wartime photograph, matched the hands in the Buenos Aires photo. By April 1960, Mossad was 95% certain that Ricardo Clement was Adolf Eichmann. Isser Harel presented the evidence to Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. The decision to proceed was political as much as operational. Capturing Eichmann illegally in Argentina could damage Israel's relationships with Latin American countries. It could spark international criticism of Israeli disregard for sovereignty, but the opportunity to bring the architect of the Holocaust to justice, to put him on trial in Jerusalem before the world, was too significant to pass up. Ben-Gurion authorized the operation. The mission was codenamed Operation Finale. Planning began immediately. Mossad assembled a team of operatives, eventually numbering more than 30 people, who would travel to Argentina separately over several weeks, establishing cover identities as tourists, businesspeople, students. They rented safe houses in Buenos Aires suburbs, purchased vehicles, established communication protocols. The operation required extraordinary coordination. They couldn't simply grab Eichmann off the street. Too many witnesses, too much risk of police intervention. They needed to capture him in a location where they could control the environment, then hold him securely while arranging transportation out of Argentina. The plan that emerged was audacious. They would kidnap Eichmann on his way home from work, sedate him, hold him in a safe house for several days, then smuggle him out of Argentina on an El Al flight that would be in Buenos Aires for Argentina's 150th independence anniversary celebrations. The El Al plane would have diplomatic protection as it was carrying Israeli officials to the anniversary ceremonies. Once Eichmann was aboard and the plane took off, Argentine authorities would have no ability to stop it. The plan depended on perfect timing: capture Eichmann, hide him for exactly the right number of days, get him to the airport at exactly the right moment, all without Argentine police discovering what was happening. The team began arriving in Buenos Aires in early May 1960. They maintained strict operational security, no contact between team members in public places, communications only through dead drops and prearranged signals, constant awareness of possible Argentine intelligence surveillance. They rented 3 safe houses in different suburbs, creating redundancy in case one was compromised. They purchased 2 cars with forged Argent documents. They rehearsed the abduction dozens of times, timing every second, planning for every contingency. Surveillance of Eichmann intensified. The team needed to identify the perfect moment and location for capture. They documented his daily routine. He left work at the Mercedes-Benz factory at the same time each day, took the same bus, walked the same route from the bus stop to his house. The walk from the bus stop was the vulnerable point. For about 5 minutes, Eichmann walked alone on a dark street with few houses. If they timed it perfectly, they could grab him there with minimal risk of witnesses. On May 11, 1960, the team positioned themselves along Eichmann's route home. 2 operatives waited in a car with engine running. Others positioned themselves as lookouts, ready to signal if police or unexpected civilians appeared. As Eichmann walked towards his house at approximately 8 p.m., the car pulled alongside him. 2 operatives jumped out, grabbed him, and pulled him into the car. The entire sequence took less than 30 seconds. Eichmann tried to scream, but a hand clamped over his mouth. Within minutes, he was in the safe house, restrained, confused, terrified. The team's doctor examined him, confirming he was physically healthy enough to travel. Then came the moment of definitive identification. An operative asked him directly, "What is your name?" Eichmann, realizing the futility of denial, responded in German, "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann. I am Adolf Eichmann." After 15 years of hiding, of pretending to be Ricardo Clement, of living in fear of discovery, he almost seemed relieved to finally acknowledge his real identity. For the next 9 days, Eichmann was held in the safe house while the team finalized extraction plans. He was treated reasonably, fed, allowed to wash, not physically harmed. Mossad operatives even engaged him in conversations about the war, recording his statements. Eichmann, believing he would eventually be killed, spoke with surprising openness about his role in the Holocaust, defending his actions as following orders, claiming he had no personal animosity toward Jews but was simply executing policy. His statements revealed the banality of his evil. He had organized mass murder with the dispassionate efficiency of a logistics manager. The extraction plan faced unexpected complications. Argentine police had discovered that a German immigrant had been kidnapped, though they didn't yet know it was Eichmann. They were investigating, checking hospitals, morgues, questioning neighbors. The safe house was under increasing risk of discovery. The team had to keep Eichmann hidden while waiting for the El Al flight that wouldn't arrive until May 20th. Every additional day increased the danger. On May 20th, the team moved Eichmann to a different safe house closer to the airport. They sedated him and dressed him in an El Al crew uniform, creating the appearance that he was an Israeli airline employee who had become ill. They obtained forged Argentine exit papers. Then, in the evening of May 20th, they drove him to Ezeiza International Airport. The El Al plane was waiting, prepared for immediate departure once Eichmann was aboard. Getting through airport security was the most dangerous moment. If Argentine authorities inspected too carefully, if the sedation wore off and Eichmann regained consciousness, if someone recognized him despite the disguise, any of these could destroy the operation. But the combination of forged documents, Eichmann's apparent illness, and the El Al crew's insistence that they needed to get their sick colleague home worked. Security waved them through. Eichmann was carried aboard the plane, placed in a seat in the crew section, and restrained. The plane took off at 12:05 a.m. on May 21, 1960. As it climbed into the night sky over Buenos Aires, the operatives finally allowed themselves to believe they had succeeded. Adolf Eichmann, who had evaded justice for 15 years, who had believed himself safe in Argentina, was now in Israeli custody, heading to Jerusalem to stand trial for crimes against humanity. The revelation of the kidnapping triggered international crisis. Argentina protested furiously to the United Nations, accusing Israel of violating its sovereignty. The UN Security Council condemned the operation, though stopping short of demanding Eichmann's return. Many Latin American countries expressed solidarity with Argentina, viewing the operation as dangerous precedent where powerful countries could conduct military operations in weaker countries with impunity. But Israel stood firm. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion declared that Eichmann would stand trial in Jerusalem, that the crimes he committed against the Jewish people gave Israel moral and legal authority to judge him regardless of where he was captured. The trial began in April 1961 in a specially constructed courtroom in Jerusalem. For 4 months, the world watched as prosecutors presented evidence of Eichmann's role in the Holocaust. Survivors testified, describing the deportations Eichmann organized, the death camps where his trains delivered victims, the bureaucratic machinery of genocide he had operated. Eichmann sat in a bulletproof glass booth, listening through headphones as translators converted testimony into German. He showed little emotion, occasionally taking notes, maintaining the demeanor of a bureaucrat reviewing administrative details rather than a defendant facing judgment for mass murder. Eichmann's defense was consistent. He was following orders he had no authority to refuse. He personally harbored no hatred toward Jews. His lawyer argued that Eichmann was a small cog in a large machine, that holding him individually responsible for the Holocaust was unjust when thousands of others had participated. But the prosecution demonstrated through captured Nazi documents that Eichmann had been enthusiastic in his role, that he had taken initiative beyond orders, that he had personally intervened to ensure deportation trains continued operating even when German military logistics needed those same rail lines. The trial achieved what Ben-Gurion had intended. It educated a generation of Israelis and the world about the Holocaust in unprecedented detail. Television broadcasts and newspaper coverage brought testimony into millions of homes. Young Israelis who had grown up after the war learned for the first time the full scope of what had been done to European Jews. The trial created permanent record, filmed and transcribed, that would forever refute Holocaust denial. On December 15, 1961, the court found Eichmann guilty on all counts: crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes against the Jewish people. The sentence was death. Eichmann appealed, arguing procedural irregularities and illegal capture. The Israeli Supreme Court rejected his appeal. President Yitzhak Ben-Zvi refused clemency. On May 31, 1962, Adolf Eichmann was hanged at Ramla prison, the only person ever executed by Israel's civilian justice system. His body was cremated, the ashes scattered in international waters to ensure no grave could become a neo-Nazi shrine. The operation remained controversial. Critics argued Israel had violated international law, that kidnapping Eichmann from Argentina set dangerous precedent, that the trial was victor's justice rather than impartial legal proceeding. Supporters argued that the enormity of Eichmann's crimes transcended normal legal considerations, that bringing him to justice was moral imperative regardless of legal technicalities, that Argentina's protection of Nazi war criminals forfeited its right to complain about sovereignty violations. For Mossad, Operation Finale became defining achievement. The patients required 3 years of surveillance before capture demonstrated operational discipline. The complexity of executing kidnapping in foreign country 10,000 miles from Israel demonstrated capability. The success, despite enormous risks, demonstrated boldness. The operation established Mossad's reputation as intelligence service that could reach anywhere in the world to achieve objectives Israel deemed vital to national survival. For Adolf Eichmann, the years in Argentina had been an illusion of safety. He had believed that distance and false identity provided protection. He had built a life, raised children, grown old, convinced himself that the past was behind him. He never imagined that across the world, in a country that hadn't existed when he committed his crimes, an intelligence service was methodically tracking him, documenting his life, preparing for the moment when past would finally catch present. His capture demonstrated that for certain crimes, there is no statute of limitations, no distance far enough, no disguise convincing enough. Justice might be delayed, but it would eventually arrive. If this investigation into how Mossad tracked a Nazi war criminal for years, confirmed his identity through painstaking surveillance, and executed the most audacious kidnapping in intelligence history fascinated you, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe because we're continuing to expose operations that shaped modern history, and activate notifications. The next extraordinary manhunt is ready to be revealed.